Okay. We got to the point in the evening where we're going to hit our featured speaker, and we are so lucky to have Mr. Chris Mooney tonight. He's a personal idol of mine as a scientist. I've looked to his work a lot, actually, for how we communicate as scientists to the public. And I don't think this is emphasized enough, especially in DC, where the first thing that gets cut usually is science funding, Hill staffers.
Yeah.
Anyway, so Chris Mooney's a best-selling author. He's written The Republican War on Science and Unscientific America. He also runs Discover Magazine's flagship blog, The Intersection. He's spoken all around the world. He speaks about science politics, the public understanding of science, and science communication. We're so lucky to have him, and you guys are in for a treat tonight. So I want to introduce Mr. Chris Mooney.
Thanks. Where's my clicker? Yeah, you stole my clicker, dude. Alright. How's everybody doing? Woo! What was the funniest Make Nerdy Love To thing that you saw so far? Anybody? You guys are so shy. Nobody's loosening you up yet. I'll loosen you up. I'll loosen you up.
Yeah.
Okay. What I want to talk to you about tonight is what I call our unscientific America. In other words, why is there such a gap between people like you who know and care about and grok the world of science and everybody else? And what can we do about it? You know, it's a staggering paradox when you think about it. The United States has the best universities in the world. It invests more money in science than any other country in the world, more money in science than the GDPs of many countries in the world, and yet the United States is falling behind many of them in science education. It's getting its clock cleaned in clean energy innovation. Most Americans, meanwhile, don't even know this. They don't feel that they should care. They don't see how it's a problem. They don't see how this affects their lives at all. How could we get into that situation? Because America's scientific illiteracy or disengagement is very destructive. How did we get there, and what can we do about it? That's what I'm going to focus on, but before I even get there, I want to tell you a little bit about me. I mean, after all, why am I speaking on this subject? What do I know about it? I'm not a scientist. I'm a journalist. I think I understand scientists pretty well. I have sort of science in the family background. My grandfather, Gerald Cole, was a biologist, technically a limnologist. He studied freshwater ecosystems.
All right.
And he was... I got one fan the whole way through. So, and you know, he was a sort of irascible scientist type of the sort that many of you may have encountered before. So the one thing that I remember growing up was that he had an invisible friend that he talked to on our behalf, and it was our invisible friend too. This friend's name was Chuck, which was short for Chuck Darwin. So there would be at the dinner table this empty, chair, and Chuck was a drinker. And so I got to know a lot about the scientific worldview through this means. And this has sort of come out the last 10 years. I've written pretty extensively about the intersection, the relationship between science and public policy. The first book was called The Republican War on Science. And at the outset of talks, I like to disclose to the audience there's no conscious intention here of echoing the cover image of another popular book. We only really notice that later. But the argument of the book, of my book, I don't know, the argument of that one is more simple. But the argument of my book was that under this guy, right, science had come under attack across a wide variety of politicized areas. Climate change, stem cell research, anything having anything to do with sex. Evolution, on, endangered species, on and on. I think the era was kind of epitomized accidentally, because when Bush says something wise, it's always accidental. It was epitomized in a speech, a response that the president actually gave in a question at a press conference. And this was right after the devastating 2004 Christmas tsunami that inundated so many Pacific Rim countries, killed so many people. Bush finally does a press conference, and at this press conference, a journalist asks him a question that involves science, at least a technical matter. The question is, Mr. President, does the United States have a warning system in place to protect us from tsunamis? Bush has no freaking idea, right? So he sort of stumbles, he hems and haws. Then he tries to say something scientific, which is not wise, but he tried to say something scientific. He started to say, well, I think we might be less vulnerable than other parts of the world to tsunamis, but as he quickly added, I am not a geologist, as you know. And he was right. He wasn't a geologist. So anyway, by making fun of Bush, I was popular. And so I went on the road to give a talk about the book. And my strategy for communicating to people about the topic was, hey, I'm going to rattle off all of the evil things that the Bush administration has done about science. I'm going to give you all the crimes. They did this on global warming, they did this on stem cells, all that. This had a really predictable effect on audiences of scientists, right? Okay, so steam coming out of the ears, hands clenched, anger and anger and anger, and then the talk would end, hands go up, every night, every time, same question. Okay, they would say, you've made me angry. You've made me want to punch a wall. Can't believe this is going on in my government, these kinds of words. You haven't given me any release. You haven't told me what I can do about this problem. And I realized that my instinctual answer to that question, which was, you can buy the book, was inadequate. And so I started trying to think about, rather than all the things wrong, solutions. What could we do? How could we make it better? It's not an easy problem. How do we bridge this disconnect between science, politics, and society? This big, dysfunction, where all these things are rolling around, they've got to get along, and they don't get along. And so that was what Unscientific America was about. That's my co-author, Cheryl. She's not unscientific. And we started the book off with this case study that, we got a lot of flack for. Okay? People were like, this is not serious, this is not a big deal. The demotion of Pluto from the solar system. Okay. Now you hear that? How could anyone say that's not a big deal? You're emoting. You care. And that's what I said. Everyone's like, oh, this is gonna, mess with the mobiles that babies play with. That's like the only thing that's gonna happen. No! If you want to find something that Americans actually know about science, one, and actually care about, you can't do better than the demotion of Pluto. Not only do they care, they're pissed. They're pissed. They can't believe the scientists did this to the underdog of the solar system, and that they don't get to argue back in the peer-reviewed literature. But what do? They make T-shirts and bumper stickers to argue back, and they get the scientists back pretty good, I think. So this is the gap between science and the public, right here. Seriously, there's a lot of ways of documenting the gap besides T-shirts. There is the famous data on scientific illiteracy, and I think many of you have already heard this. Americans don't know much, or they know the wrong things. So something like 40% don't accept evolution. Not only that, they think that the Earth is less than 10,000 years old. This puts me in mind of a quotation. I'll just let you read that. So, a lot of Americans aren't Darwinians. They've missed out on, pretty much the biggest scientific revolution of the last 200 years. They don't know who and what we actually are. Okay? We're related to every other living thing on Earth. They don't know that. That's kind of crazy. But if you think they're not Darwinians, a lot of them are not even Copernicans. Only 53% know how long it takes for the Earth to orbit the Sun. So they've missed out on the two biggest scientific revolutions of the last 500 years, and pretty much the whole scientific revolution, when you think about it. Or at least the highlights. So this is bad. This is bad. Americans don't know a lot about science. It's not the problem, though. It's part of the problem. It is not the whole problem. And I think it would be naive to think that just putting things in people's heads is going to, make them good, science-sensitive, and savvy citizens. I don't think that's what it's about. I think more important is disengagement, in the sense that they don't see why they should know. What does this matter to me? How does this affect my life? Isn't that something those strange others and you do, right? That's what they think. And there's lots of data to show this too. So only 18% of Americans actually know a scientist personally. Tonight, if you didn't, hopefully you'll meet one. But for most of them, it's It's a Hollywood stereotype, that's what a scientist is like, or a weatherman. Or someone here. Only 13% follow science and technology news very closely. So these are the people that read the Scientific Americans, the Discover magazines. They're the knowledge rich. They know lots about science. They're not the ones we need to reach. And so they're consuming and everyone else is watching the Food Network, okay? And that's getting worse. That's not getting better, as we'll see. Now get this one. 44%, when asked in surveys, can't name a scientific role model, okay? That's silence on the phone when you ask them. And the remainder, when they do give a name, what do you think their top 3 choices are? Einstein? Al Gore? It's rare that you guys get 2 for 3, so it's these guys, right? So, in other words, America's scientific role models. America's scientific role models. That's like a Fox News picture of him. So, they're either not scientists or they're not alive, right? That's how America sees scientists. And you might think, how are we going to reconnect them? How are we going to get them back on board with this really important thing they need to know? Well, the media, right, that should be communicating science. But unfortunately, what we've seen with the growth of the new media is a complete implosion and decimation of careers in science communication in the traditional media. Here's just one example. Andrew Revkin, who was the ace covering global warming and environment and energy for the New York Times for so many years, just sort of hung up his spikes. He's like, this is a smaller and smaller slice of the total conversation about science, being a reporter. Now he's a blogger, he's a professor. He at least had a choice. Many science journalists have been laid off. There's some noteworthy statistics about this. For example, there was a Pew 2008 study that found that if you watch 5 hours of cable news, you should on average see about 1 minute of coverage of science and technology. And I experienced this firsthand because I was on MSNBC, I was sometimes on there, I was on Morning Joe to talk about the book, and that particular little fact is on the cover jacket. 5 hours of cable news, 1 minute of science and technology. So they put up like all the little facts about the case I was making, which was nice, and they rattled that one off. But then the host, Mika Brzezinski, says, well, that's us he's talking about. And then they gave me 3 minutes. Another study from the Shorenstein Center at Harvard by Chris Russell, who I know well, found that if you look at daily newspapers, the daily newspaper science section, they dropped off by 2/3 over the last couple of decades. So in other words, you used to always get science as part of your weekly newspaper diet. It was like the vegetables. And I know people would throw it out. They wanted to read sports, but at least they had to actively throw it out. They don't have to do that anymore. So where are they learning about science at all? There's still the mass media, right? And so you see scientists and entertainers. But they usually look like this. Mean, male, gray-haired, and mad. Or as one female scientist put it, and I love this, male, pale, and stale. That's what scientists are in the entertainment media. And I agree, I admit that that's changing a little bit, but it's not the kind of image that we want to give kids. There's one study that shows that when young scientists, especially like female scientists, come in and talk to the kids in the classroom when they're young, they don't believe it's a scientist because you're not old, you don't have a beard, and you're not white. How could you be a scientist? Kids are having trouble with this, not surprisingly. Let me just tell you some of my favorite Hollywood depictions of science, right? So, who's seen The Day After Tomorrow? Yeah. We always have sci-fi nerds in my audience. Why is that? People are self-selecting into my information stream. Let's just do a quick plot summary, okay? So what happens The Day After Tomorrow? Global warming leads to a new ice age. New ice age. You should be skeptical of global warming leading to a new ice age. In the ice age, the world is attacked by massive upside-down freezing hurricanes that travel over land. We have a hurricane coming at us right now. It gets its energy from the sea surface, and it's a heat engine, so it processes the energy, uses it to do work, and then expels some of it up in the atmosphere. But these storms, They take the freezing air from the stratosphere and they fire it at your heart. And they turn you into an icicle. But the characters that we care about, the protagonists, they're going to survive the Ice Age because they hole up in the New York Public Library. And what do?
They burn books.
Burn books. Very good.